I've never been the type to snoop. I work in cybersecurity, for crying out loud. I know all too well the slippery slope of digital intrusion, how easy it is to twist curiosity into justification. But that night was different. Leanne had gone to the gym, or at least that's what she told me. She left her laptop on the kitchen counter, lid half closed but still on. It was nothing unusual. She often left it lying around, but I noticed the screen was frozen on a strange window. Not a browser, not Word, not even something I recognized immediately. It was a command line interface. Black screen, green text, old school. My pulse kicked up. I've spent enough time digging into corporate breach reports to know that no normal person uses this kind of tool unless they're running scripts for something. Not exactly consumer friendly. I told myself to leave it. I even walked away, opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, but when I came back, my eyes were still glued to that little blinking cursor, and then I saw it. A file name sitting in the directory list. Aurora_payload_v3.enc.encrypted. Payload. Version 3. I froze. The words screamed malware to me. Or at the very least, some kind of data package you wouldn't want your boss, or the police, to find. Here's the thing about me. I've built a career on catching people doing shady digital crap. Not because I like busting them, but because I'm good at spotting patterns. And everything about that file name set off alarms in my brain. I told myself I wouldn't open it. I told myself it was none of my business. I told myself a lot of things, but then the paranoia started whispering. What if this is why she's been acting weird lately? What if this has something to do with those late night calls with her sister? What if I'm marrying someone who's into something dangerous? So I did what I promised myself I wouldn't do. I sat down, opened a terminal, and started digging. It was locked down hard. Whoever encrypted this wasn't just using some random password-protected zip file. This was AES to 5.6 with a multi-layer passphrase and salting algorithm. That's not casual security. That's I could go to prison for this security. I tried a few basic brute force scripts just to see if it was even possible. And after about 15 minutes, I hit something. Not the file itself, but metadata. A time stamp. The payload had been created. 4 days ago, Leanne told me she was visiting her mom in Vermont. Except I checked her Instagram that weekend. She posted a throwback hiking picture, but the weather data in the EXIF metadata. Completely different day. Now my hands were shaking. I backed out of the encryption attempt. I didn't want to leave any traces. I'd already crossed a line, and if Leanne was into something illegal, I couldn't afford to spook her, but the questions wouldn't stop. When she came home an hour later, all sweaty and smiling from the gym, I tried to act normal. Hey, she said, tossing her gym bag onto the couch. You eat yet? Not yet, I said, forcing a casual tone. Was just finishing some emails. She smiled, walked over, and kissed me. And just like that, I felt like the world's worst person for digging into her stuff. Maybe I'd made a mountain out of a molehill. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of it. But then, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Drop went smooth. Waiting on green light for next phase. I swear my blood ran cold. Over the next week, I became a man possessed. I didn't confront her right away. I wanted proof, real proof, before I accused the woman I was about to marry of. Whatever the hell this was, every time she left the apartment, I'd check her laptop's network logs. I couldn't see the contents of her encrypted files, but I could track the IP addresses she connected to. A lot of them were bouncing through VPN servers, but I traced one endpoint back to a data center in Zurich that I knew was used by a corporate blackmail ring I'd helped investigate 2 years ago. Coincidence? Maybe, but my gut told me otherwise. The strangest part, she was still perfect, sweet, attentive, talking about wedding venues and honeymoon ideas like nothing was wrong, and that made it worse. Because every smile felt like a lie I couldn't quite catch in the act. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. She said she was going to a book club with some friends from work. She even kissed me on the forehead before leaving, but something in her eyes, a flicker I can't explain, told me she wasn't going to be discussing Pride and Prejudice. I waited 20 minutes, then followed her. She didn't go to a cafe. She didn't even go downtown. She drove to a warehouse in the industrial district. I parked far enough away to watch as she walked up to a side door, knocked twice, then disappeared inside. I sat there for nearly 2 hours, my heart pounding, until she finally came out, carrying a small silver briefcase. When she got home that night, she didn't mention the book club at all. Here's the worst part. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was fascinated, like I'd stumbled into a story bigger than my own life, and I couldn't look away. That night, while she slept, I made a copy of her entire laptop drive. It took hours, and I had to bypass the different encrypted partitions, but by dawn, I had it all stored on my secure work server. I didn't even know what I was going to do with it yet. All I knew was that the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was living a double life, and I was about to find out just how deep that rabbit hole went. I've spent my career tracing breadcrumbs. Usually, they belong to hackers trying to cover their tracks after breaking into corporate servers. But this time, the breadcrumbs belonged to the woman I was supposed to marry in 6 months. The copy of Leanne's drive sat like a loaded gun on my work laptop. I didn't touch it during office hours. Too risky, but that Friday night, after she fell asleep next to me, I plugged in my external SSD and opened the files. The first thing I noticed was the organization. Or rather, the lack of it. Her personal photos, tax documents, and wedding guest list were all mixed in with strange directories labeled in code. Things like Opal_transit, Kite_logs, and Vanguard ops. It looked chaotic. But I've seen chaos used as camouflage before. I started with OPAL_transit. Inside were CSV files, spreadsheets of dates, times, locations, and codes. The locations caught my eye immediately. Warehouses, docks, and airfields, not public airports. Either small, private runways I knew from past cases. Then I opened Kite_logs. These were encrypted chat logs. I ran them through a decryption tool. No luck. Whatever she was using wasn't your average consumer encryption. This was military-grade. My gut twisted. I decided to do what I do best. Pivot. If I couldn't crack the encryption, I could trace the metadata. That's when I found something that made my skin crawl. One of the folders contained PDF invoices. Not the kind you send to a client for freelance work. These were invoices for consulting services billed to shell companies. I recognized from anti-money laundering watch lists. Each invoice was for absurd amounts. $48,000, $76,500, $92,000. And every one of them was marked paid to an account in Zurich. The same Zurich data center I'd already traced her network activity to. Now, if you're thinking I went straight to the cops, you don't know me very well. I've worked with law enforcement enough to know they move slow, and I had zero proof Leanne herself was the one pulling the strings. For all I knew, she could have been a pawn in someone else's game, but my instincts said otherwise. The next day, I made my move. Saturday morning, I suggested we grab brunch at this little spot downtown. Leanne was in a good mood, laughing, holding my hand, telling me about a wedding dress she'd found online. I played along, asking all the right questions, smiling at all the right times. But halfway through the meal, I excused myself to the bathroom, pulled out my phone, and slid a small tracking device into her purse. I hated myself for it. I also knew I wasn't going to stop. That night, the tracker pinged me. She told me she was going out with Sophie from work for drinks. The dot on my map didn't go anywhere near a bar dot. It went to a townhouse in the suburbs. A nondescript, beige, upper-middle-class place that looked like every other house on the block. I parked 2 streets away and walked. Through a gap in the curtains, I saw movement. Leanne talking to a man I'd never seen before. He was older, mid-40s, sharp suit. The kind of guy who carries power like a scent. She handed him a folder. He opened it, glanced at the contents, then slid something across the table toward her dot. It looked like a passport. I didn't get closer. I didn't take pictures. Something told me that crossing that line would change everything, and I wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, I waited until she got home, just past midnight. She smelled faintly of expensive cologne, not hers. She curled up next to me in bed like nothing happened. The next morning, I made my second big mistake. I decided to confront her, but not directly. Over breakfast, I casually mentioned that work had me digging into some shell company fraud cases lately. I dropped the name of one of the Zurich companies from her invoices, just to see her reaction. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just kept stirring her coffee and said, "Sounds boring." That was scarier than if she'd panicked. That day, I dug deeper into Vanguard Ops. Inside were dozens of JPEGs, each showing blurry aerial shots of what looked like industrial sites. Some had numbers scrawled in the corners, coordinates, maybe. Others had strange symbols that I didn't recognize. I cross-referenced one of the coordinates. It led to an abandoned military base in upstate New York.
Subscribe to the channel and like this video.
I didn't know if I was losing my mind or finally seeing clearly. Either way, I had a plan. If Leanne was involved in something covert, dangerous even, I couldn't just watch from the sidelines. I needed to be in it, at least enough to understand what she was doing. The only way to get there, make her believe I could be trusted with more than just our Netflix password. That Monday, I staged the perfect coincidence. I told her I'd gotten called into a last-minute client meeting across town. Then I made sure to show up by accident at the exact coffee shop she and Sophie from work liked to visit after office hours. She looked surprised but smiled. "Alex, what are you doing here?" I shrugged, holding up my laptop. Meeting ran long. Figured I'd grab an espresso before heading home. We chatted for a bit. Casual, nothing deep. But when Sophie went to the restroom, I leaned in, slightly, and lowered my voice. You ever get the feeling people at work don't tell you the whole truth? It was vague enough to seem harmless. But her eyes flicked to me with this quick, assessing look, like she was measuring something. Then Sophie came back, and the moment was gone. That night, I made sure to be the perfect fiancé, cooked dinner, listened to her vent about a client issue, rubbed her shoulders while she worked on her laptop. The next morning, she dropped the bomb. "You know," she said casually over breakfast, "you're pretty good with sensitive information." I played dumb. "What's that supposed to mean?" She smiled. "Just that you've got a good poker face, and you notice things. I might actually need that sometime." I raised an eyebrow. Need it for what? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she poured herself more coffee, took a slow sip, and finally said, "There's a work thing, kind of. Off the books. We've got a problem with a supplier who's not being honest. I could use someone who knows how to dig quietly." I forced myself to keep my expression neutral, even as my pulse picked up. "Sounds interesting," I said. We met the following night in a quiet wine bar. She slid into the booth opposite me with a small leather folder. Inside were printouts, invoices, email headers, shipment records. On the surface, it looked like standard business disputes, but the email metadata, that told another story. The supplier's messages had been routed through at least 3 anonymous servers before reaching her. Classic obfuscation technique. I scanned the headers, pretending to work through them slowly, but the pattern was obvious. These weren't late shipments or billing issues. These were covert comms. Looks like someone's hiding. They're tracks. I said. She watched me closely. Can you find out where it actually came from? I nodded. Yeah, but it'll take some time. You should also know, this doesn't look like normal supplier crap. Whoever this is, they know what they're doing. For a split second, I thought I saw it, a flicker of approval. That weekend, I traced the source to a location in Miami. Not an office, not a warehouse, a luxury condo on the water. When I showed her, she didn't seem surprised. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You're good at this, Alex. Better than I thought." It sounded like a compliment. It also sounded like a test I'd just passed. Then she asked the question that would change everything. Do you want to meet them? I froze. Meet who? She smiled faintly, almost like she'd been expecting my hesitation. The supplier. I have to go down there next week. You could come with me. See for yourself. Every instinct I had screamed at me to say no. But I wasn't here to play it safe. Yeah, I said finally. Let's go to Miami. That night, lying in bed beside her, I kept my breathing slow and steady until she drifted off. Then I stared at the ceiling, trying to work out what I'd just agreed to. If this was really about a supplier, why the encryption? Why the shell companies? Why the man in the townhouse with the passport? And why, for the first time since we'd met, did it feel like she was finally letting me into her real life? The moment we stepped off the plane, it was clear this wasn't a standard work trip. Leanne moved with purpose, avoiding the main taxi line and heading straight for a black SUV waiting at the curb. The driver, a tall guy in a gray suit, barely glanced at me before opening the back door. No small talk, no introductions. We drove in silence for 20 minutes until we reached a glass high-rise overlooking Biscayne Bay. I'd never stayed anywhere like this. The lobby was marble and chrome, the kind of place where the front desk staff wear earpieces and call you sir like it's a code word. Upstairs, the condo was even more impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, and a view that made Miami look like a postcard. Leanne dropped her bag on the counter and pulled out her phone. "We've got an hour before we meet him," she said. Try to look like you belong. That line stuck with me. I wasn't sure if she meant belong in the condo or in whatever world she was part of. Either way, I took a quick shower, changed into something more tailored, and tried to match her level of casual confidence. At exactly 7 o'clock, we were back in the SUV, heading to a restaurant that was more like a fortress disguised as a seafood place. No signage, tinted windows. Valet only. Inside, the lighting was low, the tables spread far apart, and the air smelled faintly of cigars and salt water. A man in his late 40s was already seated at a corner table. Dark hair slicked back, expensive watch, the kind of tan you don't get from a vacation. More like from living on the water year-round. Leanne greeted him with a kiss on both cheeks, then introduced me. "This is Alex. He's helping me with the situation." Helping her. Not fiance, not partner. Just helping. I shook his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive. His eyes sharp in a way that made you feel he already knew too much. We ordered drinks, and the conversation started out light. Weather, travel, the new marina opening. Then it shifted. Leanne slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, contracts, and a few photos that I didn't recognize. The man flipped through them slowly, occasionally glancing at me. "So," he said finally, "you traced the Miami node." I hesitated just long enough to realize he was talking to me, not her. "Yeah," I said. It was routed through 3 layers of masking, but I pulled the original IP. Matches this address. I tapped the page with the condo listing. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Good work. For the rest of dinner, they talked in half-finished sentences and shorthand I didn't understand. I caught fragments: shipment, transfer, asset freeze, but nothing that made complete sense. Still, the tone was clear. This was negotiation, not catching up with an old friend. When we left, the man shook my hand again. "You should come out on the water tomorrow," he said. "We'll talk more." Back at the condo, I asked Leanne what that was all about. She was already kicking off her heels, her expression unreadable. "It's business, Alex. Just business." "That's not business," I said. "That's something else." She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You want it in. This is in. Tomorrow, you'll see more." I lay awake that night, the sound of waves against the seawall mixing with the hum of the air conditioning. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever tomorrow was, it would push me even further from the life I thought I knew, and yet I didn't want to turn back. The morning sun bounced off the water like shards of glass, making me squint as we walked down the marina. The yacht wasn't just big, it was the kind of floating palace you'd see in a documentary about billionaires. 3 decks, all gleaming white, with chrome railings polished to a mirror finish. The same black SUV dropped us at the gate, and Leanne walked ahead, flashing a smile at the security guard who waved us through without so much as checking our IDs. On board, the man from last night was already waiting, dressed in a linen shirt and aviators, holding a coffee mug that definitely wasn't just coffee. "Alex," he said with that same knowing smile, "glad you made it." Within minutes, the engines roared to life, and we pulled out into open water. The air smelled cleaner out here, salty and sharp. Leanne seemed more relaxed, leaning against the railing, her hair whipping in the wind. But there was a tension beneath it, a readiness, like she was waiting for something. We didn't have to wait long. A smaller speedboat approached from the south, cutting through the waves with precision. 2 men climbed aboard carrying a hard-shell case between them. They barely acknowledged me before disappearing below deck. "Let's talk inside," the man said. The main cabin was a mix of luxury and tech. Leather seating, built-in screens, and a table scattered with documents and tablets. He gestured for me to sit. "You're in cybersecurity. You understand data, what I'm about to show. You isn't just numbers." He unlocked the hard-shell case. Inside was a laptop and several thick envelopes. On the screen, as he typed in a password, appeared a series of images: shipping containers, customs documents, satellite images of a port at night. "This," he said, "is what the Miami node was hiding. Not just money laundering, cargo, and some of it not legal." Leanne didn't flinch. She was scrolling through one of the envelopes, pulling out photos of crates stamped with serial numbers. "We need to know which shipments are flagged and which aren't," she said, handing me a sheet of paper. "You can cross-reference these against customs logs, right?" I nodded slowly, my brain working overtime. "Yeah, I can. But why me? You've clearly got people for this." She met my eyes. "Because I trust you." That hit me harder than I expected, but it also raised a question. Trust me for what? To help them move this along, to keep quiet, or to be the fall guy if things went south? The rest of the day blurred into a series of tasks: pulling up shipping records, running quick checks on fake company names, tracing container movements. By late afternoon, I knew more than I wanted to. These weren't just consumer goods. Some crates contained weapons. Others, well, the documentation was vague, which made it worse. When we finally docked back at the marina, I felt like I'd aged a year. As we walked back to the SUV, I asked Leanne, "How long have you been doing this?" She didn't look at me. Long enough to know that walking away isn't an option. I wanted to press her, demand an explanation, but the look in her eyes told me that today wasn't the day. Instead, I sat in silence as the driver pulled away, my mind spinning. I was in. And now I had to figure out if I could get out, or if I even wanted to. Back at my apartment, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the images from the yacht, the serial numbers, the port maps. The Walian avoided answering my question. I opened my laptop and started pulling up my company's internal database. I told myself it was just to reassure myself that my work had nothing to do with her world. But deep down, I already knew what I was looking for. It didn't take long. The first serial number I typed in came back as no match. I breathed out, but the second, it was there, buried in a routine shipping audit my team had filed 2 months ago. I cross-checked a few more from memory. 3 matches, 4, 7. Each hit made my chest tighten. These containers had passed through the exact same customs checkpoint my company handled digital clearance for. That meant either my employer was unknowingly moving illicit cargo, or someone inside was very aware and making sure the system looked clean. I thought about Leanne. The timing of when we met, how fast we'd gotten. Serious? How perfectly our lives seemed to align. Was it all coincidence? Or had she known exactly who I was from the start? At 2:13 a.m., I got a text from an unknown number. Stop looking where you don't belong. No name, no follow-up. Just that, I stared at the screen for a full minute before deleting the message. My hands were shaking, and not just from lack of sleep. The next day at work, I pulled my closest colleague, Matt, into the server room under the excuse of system maintenance. I showed him the matches. His reaction was immediate and telling. "Alex, you need to forget you saw this," he said, glancing toward the door. "These are above our pay grade. Way above. Are you saying the company's in on it?" I asked. He hesitated. "I'm saying, if you value your job and maybe your safety, close the files, pretend they don't exist." The warning only confirmed what I already suspected. But I couldn't just ignore it, especially not now that I knew Leanne's operations were tangled up with mine. That night, I went to her apartment. She seemed surprised to see me, but let me in without hesitation. The place smelled faintly of jasmine and coffee. "You were right," I told her, skipping the small talk about walking away not being an option. "Those shipments, they're tied to my company." Her expression didn't change much, but there was a flicker, something between recognition and regret. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said quietly. "Find out what?" "That you targeted me. It's not like that," she said quickly. "Yes, I knew who you were, but I didn't get close to you for this. At least, not entirely." The words hit harder than I expected. Not entirely. Do you hear yourself? She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "If I hadn't been with you, they would have found another way in. At least this way, I could control how deep you got involved." I didn't know whether to laugh or shout. The idea that she thought she was protecting me while actively pulling me into the fire felt insane. Before I could respond, she handed me a flash drive. "This is everything I've got on the shipments, every manifest, every transaction. If you decide to walk away, destroy it. If you decide to fight, well, then you'll need it." I left without saying another word, the drive burning a hole in my pocket. On the subway home, I realized something terrifying. If she was right, I was already into deep. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly where she wanted me. The next morning, I sat at my desk with the flash drive in front of me like it was some cursed relic. I must have stared at it for 20 minutes before finally plugging it into an offline laptop I kept for side projects. The drive was encrypted, but I'd been in cybersecurity long enough to recognize her work. A simple bypass, almost like she wanted me to get in. The first folder was labeled cargo. Inside, hundreds of PDFs. Each one was a shipping manifest, stamped and signed, listing ports, container numbers, and, in some cases, special clearance notes. I cross-referenced a few of the numbers with my company's database. Every single one matched. The second folder made my stomach drop. It was labeled board. I clicked it open and froze. Photos, not grainy surveillance shots, but clear, high-resolution images of the senior executives from my company. My CEO shaking hands with a man I recognized from an Interpol wanted list. My department head dining at a private club with someone whose name I'd only ever seen in connection with arms trafficking. The last folder was the smallest, Alex. My pulse spiked. I opened it. There were maybe a dozen files, some photos of me, some work reports I'd written, even a couple of personal emails I'd sent to friends. At the end of the list was a video file. I clicked it. Leanne appeared on screen, sitting in what looked like a hotel room. If you're watching this, it means I couldn't explain in person. She began. Her voice was steady, but her eyes kept flicking toward the door. Your company has been moving more than cargo. They've been laundering payments through shell accounts tied to the same network I'm working to dismantle. They targeted you because of your access, and I got close to make sure you weren't used the way they've used others. I'm sorry I lied about how we met. But if you trust me, we can bring them down together. If not, walk away now and never contact me again. It'll be safer for you. The video ended. I sat there for a long time, trying to process it. If she was telling the truth, then the people I'd been working for the past 5 years weren't just corrupt. They were dangerous. And they were already watching me dot around noon. Matt pinged me on our secure chat. Lunch, need to talk. We met at a small faux place 2 blocks away. The moment we sat down, he leaned in. You didn't take my advice, did you? Would you, if you found out your boss might be moving illegal shipments? He sighed. Alex, this is bigger than you. Think, people have disappeared over this. Not fired, disappeared. I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos from the board folder. Our CEO with the wanted man. His face went pale. Where did you get that? Let's just say I've got a source. Burn it, he whispered. Whatever you have, destroy it. Now, I didn't respond. I couldn't tell him that not only was I not going to destroy it, but I was planning to dig deeper. That night, I called Leanne. She didn't answer, but a few minutes later, I got a message. Not safe to talk. Meet tomorrow, noon, same cafe. As our first date, I remembered that day, the little corner table, the way she'd smiled like she'd been waiting for me for years. Now I wondered if she had been. I didn't sleep much. Every sound outside my apartment made me tense. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, but when I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. By morning, I'd made up my mind. Whatever her real reasons were, Leanne was the only one who seemed willing to tell me the truth, and if what she'd said in that video was even half accurate, then my life as I knew it was already over. I got there early. The little cafe hadn't changed much since our first date. Same mismatched chairs, same slightly too loud jazz playing from an old speaker in the corner. I took the same table, back against the wall, giving me a clear view of the entrance. Old habits die hard. At exactly noon, Leanne walked in. She wasn't dressed like herself. No bright colors, no playful accessories, just a plain black sweater, jeans, and her hair tied back. She looked like someone who didn't want to be remembered. She sat down without a smile. You watched the video, she said quietly. I did, and I have questions. Starting with why you didn't just tell me from the start. Her eyes flicked toward the counter where the barista was steaming milk. Because if I told you the truth before you were ready, you'd either run straight to your bosses or get yourself killed trying to prove me wrong. I leaned in. So prove it to me now. Show me how deep this goes. She slid a small notebook across the table. It was filled with names, dates, transaction IDs. I recognized some of the names, high-level execs, but also politicians, shipping magnates, even a judge. This is just the part one can put on paper, she whispered. The rest is digital and dangerous. I flipped through the pages. my mind racing. Why me? Why get close to me at all? Because you have access, I don't, and because she hesitated. Because I didn't expect to fall for you. Before I could respond, the door opened and 2 men walked in. I froze. I'd seen them before, in the board folder. They'd been in the background of that photo of my CEO. Leanne's expression didn't change, but her hand slid across the table, resting lightly on my wrist. "Don't look at them," she murmured. "They're here for us." My throat went dry. "What do we do?" She glanced at the back exit. "When I say go, get up and walk. Not run. Walk. They'll follow, but we need to make it to the alley. There's a car waiting." I felt every muscle in my body tense. "You have a car waiting." I always have a car waiting. The 2 men ordered coffee, but didn't sit. They just lingered near the door, scanning the room. One of them looked right at me and smiled. "Go," Leanne said. We stood, leaving the notebook on the table. My heart pounded as we moved toward the back. The men didn't follow immediately, but I could feel their eyes burning into my back. The alley was narrow, shadowed. A black sedan idled at the far end. Leanne opened the back door and shoved me inside before climbing in after me. The driver didn't say a word, just pulled out into traffic. I looked at her. "Who the hell are they?" "Enforcers," she said. "They don't ask questions. They don't need to. If they know your face, you're already a target." I stared out the window as the cafe disappeared from view, realizing that whatever line I'd been walking between my old life and this new one had just vanished. There was no going back. The sedan pulled up to a gated estate surrounded by dense trees. The driver showed an ID to a guard, and the gate swung open without hesitation. Inside, the place looked like a fortress. Cameras everywhere, security personnel at every corner. We were led inside a large, modern house. The walls were covered with screens showing live feeds of ports, shipping routes, and city intersections. There was an aura of control, of someone who saw the entire operation like a game of chess. Then he appeared, a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed, calm as if he had all the time in the world. His sharp eyes scanned me like a puzzle. "You must be Alex," he said, voice smooth but cold. "Leanne speaks highly of you." I wanted to respond, but words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded. He gestured to a chair. "Sit. We have a lot to discuss." What followed was a conversation I wasn't prepared for. He explained how the company, the shipments, the political connections, all were pieces of a larger plan to control not just markets but governments. The supplier was a front for several factions working together. When he spoke about Leanne, his tone shifted. "She is complicated, loyal, but unpredictable. You've been a useful pawn in her game, Alex." I felt the weight of that word, pawn, but I also sensed an opportunity. As the conversation went on, I realized how deep the web was and how little I really knew about anyone involved. When it was over, he offered a choice: walk away and forget everything, or join the operation fully and gain power beyond my wildest dreams. I looked at Leanne, who didn't flinch. Her eyes were steady, but there was a flicker of something: hope, fear. For the first time, I saw her not just as the woman I loved or the mystery I wanted to solve, but as someone caught in a game much bigger than us both. The choice felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind pulling at me from every direction. Walk away, erase everything I'd learned, pretend none of it mattered, or dive in head first, knowing the risks, but also the chance to take control. I looked at Leanne, her face unreadable. "What happens if we say yes?" The man's smile was thin, almost a warning. "You become part of the game. You gain influence, but you also become a target." That night, back at the safe house they'd provided, Leanne and I spread out everything we had: files, photos, names, maps. For the first time, it felt like we were on the same side, fighting the same fight. She told me stories I hadn't heard before about her family, how they'd been caught up in this mess before she was born, and how she'd spent years trying to make it right. Her tone was tired but determined. I realized then that my anger at her was misplaced. She wasn't just a player, she was a survivor. We made a plan, expose the corrupt executives and politicians, disrupt the shipments, and take back control from those who'd used people like us as pawns. It wasn't going to be easy. Every step was dangerous. We had to be smart, careful, and ruthless. As I lay awake that night, I knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. We were in this together, for better or worse. The night was thick with tension as Leanne and I sat in the cramped back room of the safe house, laptops open and fingers flying across keyboards. The hum of the city outside was a distant reminder that life went on, oblivious to the battle we were about to start. Breaking into the company's secure server wasn't easy. Firewalls thicker than I'd ever seen, security protocols that changed every few minutes, and constant surveillance. But I'd never been one to back down from a challenge. Hours passed in a blur of codes, encrypted files, and whispered commands. Then, finally, a folder popped up, confidential. Inside were transaction records, offshore accounts, emails. The smoking gun we'd been looking for. We downloaded everything we could carry on the flash drives, knowing it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. When we left the safe house, the streets felt colder, more dangerous. I kept glancing over my shoulder, every shadow seeming to morph into a threat. That night, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You've been seen." Leanne looked at me, her eyes dark but steady. "They know we're coming." We had crossed the line. There was no going back now. The next days were a whirlwind. Meetings in secret locations, coded messages, and the constant feeling of being hunted. Every contact we made was a risk, but we were driven by something stronger than fear. Hope that one day this nightmare would end. The air was thick with tension as Leanne and I sat side by side in the dimly lit room. The glow from the laptop screen illuminated our faces, revealing the exhaustion, but also the determination that had carried us through months of danger. "This is it," she said softly, clicking the final file open. "Everything we've gathered from the shipments, the executives, the offshore accounts. Once this goes public, there's no turning back." I nodded, feeling the weight of what we were about to unleash. It wasn't just a leak, it was a bomb designed to shatter the corrupt empire built on lies and deceit. Our plan was simple but risky. We would send the files simultaneously to major news outlets, government watchdogs, and several whistleblower platforms. But first, we had to make sure the data was secure and untraceable back to us. I took a deep breath and started encrypting the files through multiple layers of VPNs, proxies, and burner devices. Leanne watched over my shoulder, her hand briefly brushing mine, a silent reminder that we were in this together. Hours later, the files were dispatched into the digital abyss. We waited, barely daring to breathe. The world outside seemed paused, waiting for the inevitable fallout, and then it came. Headlines exploded across every screen. Corporate empire exposed, shipping scandal rocks government, executives linked to international smuggling ring. The evidence was undeniable, and the public outrage was swift and fierce. In the chaos, several high-profile arrests were made. Some officials resigned, others went into hiding. The company I once thought I'd built my career in was dismantled piece by piece. But it wasn't just the external victory that mattered. Sitting in that room with Leanne, I realized something far more important had changed. We had survived. Together, the threats didn't disappear overnight. We still kept our guard up, knowing there were remnants who wanted revenge. But for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. Leanne smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in a long time. "We did it," she whispered. I reached for her hand. Yeah, we did. That night, as the city lights twinkled outside our window, I finally allowed myself to hope. Hope for a future where trust wasn't a weapon and love wasn't a gamble, because sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most unexpected victories.
Subscribe to the channel and like this video.